everyone, I'm Olga Yarashevsky and I'm happy to open a brand new NexChange Interview Series with our Hong Kong Blockchain Week 2019 speakers. Great experts who participated in a major blockchain event in Hong Kong at the beginning of March will now share some unique insights, views, and opinions. And it's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Aly Madhavji. He's a managing partner of Blockchain Founders Fund. And as Aly is also an award-winning author, advisor to Polymath, and many other projects, and a wonderful speaker and a decent expert on social impact of blockchain. Hi, Aly.
Hi, Olga. Thanks so much for having me on this show.
Okay, Aly, I have to admit that your presentation on blockchain industry applications was one of the most interesting speeches at the event, and thank you for that. And you also was in a panel on dedicated to a social impact of blockchain, and I think I would like to start our conversation with this topic. And I know that you are particularly interested in and work with food and supply chains. Am I right?
Correct. Yeah. So actually, when we chatted about the different applications of blockchain, I mean, we travel all around the world, and one of the things we see is people don't actually know what's really happening. Like, where is blockchain really being used? What are the exact results that are happening, and how are companies or organizations looking to expand that? And so happy to always share those sorts of things. And yes, we have now written quite a bit of content on food supply chain to go really in depth and show how is food affecting everything that we eat, and essentially one of the most important things for our sustenance.
And do you think that so this is the area where blockchain is having the biggest impact?
I think it's one of them, right? I think there's quite a few different areas. I mean, if you were to look at, for example, a survey of senior executives, Deloitte did a survey of 1,053 executives on where blockchain will have the biggest impact, and supply chain does show up as number one. I mean, identities is another high one. Internet of Things is actually the second highest. Voting shows up a little bit lower, but also a good use case. You've also got things like payments, currency, great use case, of course, for cryptocurrency, right? And we've seen how effective that has been, and how much that's been growing, which right now it's probably the most common use case is payments and cross-border. But supply chain definitely has substantial benefits for companies.
Well, we all know about the Walmart use case, right? And any other use cases that we need to know about? Maybe something from the years past.
Yeah, so a lot of the pilots have actually only happened over the last year and a half, maybe slightly longer, and it's because a lot of companies took a while to really understand like what is blockchain. A lot of boards, were discussing on a pretty high level, or R&D groups within the company. And then they looked at launching pilots only over the last year and a half or so. I mean, Walmart's got two very interesting ones, right? And a lot of people sometimes miss what they both are, right? And so the first one was the one where they did it with Tsinghua University and IBM, and they put pork on the blockchain in China. And this includes all the way from farm to table, which a lot of that is not necessarily raised in China, right? And so it's raised in countries outside of China. And the second one, once they looked to expand that, they actually put mangoes on the blockchain, and this was in South America. And what was really interesting about this is they actually released that typically if they wanted to track their mangoes through their supply chain, right, they had to follow it all the way through all of the different middlemen, all of the different, suppliers, from the retailer all the way through all the different suppliers. And there was just so many and so complex, all the way back to, the farm that it was grown on. And that would actually take them 7 days, literally, to follow that through. And think about all the costs that are happening through that process to be able to get to the bottom. Exactly. So now it actually takes them 2.2 seconds, right? And so this is very substantial, a very clear example where you can see, a major company and what the benefit is. And think about that. That's still on early trials in reality, right? Like as this continues to expand, I mean, this will just become greater in terms of cost savings, easier for them to roll out once they've done it multiple times. And so there's even more benefits than what they've seen on this first trial.
Well, that's more of I would say like a corporate or a business application. What about the like more socially focused applications?
Yeah, so I mean, on the social focus side, I mean, maybe supply chain directly is maybe not always as common because you don't see this being run out of, say, like governments that often or things like that. I think one of the important things to note, though, is related to supply chain or food supply chain. I mean, you have the opportunity for governments, food inspectors to better control and ensure that the food we're eating is safe, that there's no outbreaks. And this is where blockchain can play another layer where, you know, food inspectors can actually inspect things and it can go directly into a system that is matching essentially for all of these different players globally in this food supply chain, right? So all of the people within that food supply chain are in this one system. You could have a food inspector that can input but not manipulate data, and that could be very valuable. I mean, cases that we've seen from a social impact perspective are things like, I mean, the UN did some trials with refugees using Ethereum, and so when refugees needed to travel, and of course they're moving around quite a bit, they're displaced, and when they needed to move, they of course had belongings before they left their initial place, right? And so what the UN helped them do is help them sell their goods, move to Ethereum. These were trials a little while back. And so they helped them move to Ethereum. And then as the refugee got to another country, the UN would actually help them liquidate that Ethereum and move back to cash. And so this was an interesting way because this prevented things like looting. It prevented things like them getting harmed because they might have had, you know, certain belongings, certain goods on them that were valuable, like say a watch, jewelry, anything like this. But also it allowed them to, you know, get some sort of cash for bigger items that they wouldn't be able to move, let's say like a table or a bed or things like this. And so they were able to get rid of some stuff and ideally get some cash and, you know, have a better start once they got to the next country with at least a little bit of cash versus, you know, the alternative of literally moving with nothing potentially. So that's one example. Yeah.
But that's a very impressive example.
Yeah, I mean, we're working on actually some much bigger things and on a bigger scale things right now with the United Nations. So we're actually writing their flagship report on emerging technologies and how that helps to improve financial inclusion and help achieve the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And what's really interesting about this is we're looking all across the spectrum, right? So we're looking at one part which relates to, you know, optimizing, say, central banks. We're looking at potentially digitizing currencies. From a central bank perspective, we're looking at potentially the creation of regional currencies or trade currencies. That's one side of it. Then we're looking at the other side, which relates to, you know, what about creating identities on blockchain for countries that have good identity records? What about creating identities on blockchain for countries that don't have identity records, right? Because there are certain countries that fail their people on this. And also, what about things like land registries? What about, you know, can you use other sorts of technologies paired with these sorts of things to help improve financial inclusion? We're also looking at unbanked and underbanked populations and refugees, migrants. So very, very interesting across the board, and working with many central banks, finance ministers, which are our target audience, and key decision makers within governments.
This brings me to my next question. And I know that at Blockchain Founders Fund, you guys work with UN and with governments, right? And what do you think about this? I think this is more of a ethical or even like philosophical question. What do you think about the government involvement in this space, like in general? I mean, doesn't it conflict with the whole decentralization idea?
Yeah, so that is a good point. So the way we look at it is blockchain has two components, right? I mean, there's the decentralized side, and there's a side that enables, better business efficiency or better efficiency that might not be fully decentralized. I mean, we kind of call it semi-decentralized, right? And so there's some certain decentralized nature, but in reality, there may be also a more centralized component. It is conflicting at times, I think, especially if you've been in the space pretty early, which we have, but we look at how this can actually transform and help millions or tens of millions of people still if we use this in certain layers related to government or organizations, right? And at the end of the day, I think the goal for everyone should ideally be to help as many people as possible with these sorts of technologies. And if you use that as a benchmark, I mean, there's no reason to question governments or organizations using this. It's just in a different way, and that's not stopping
centralized institutions, right?
Exactly, right? But it's not stopping the decentralization movement. I think what is at times is when you start looking at like government regulation on things like cryptocurrencies. However, keep in mind that in many cases this was justified, right? There was a lot of scams, there was a lot of people misleading people, there was straight out fraud in many cases, right? And that's been proven. And there is a reason for governments, and there is a role for governments, at least in my opinion, to protect people in certain cases, right? In many cases. And this is one of them, right? People completely being misled, scammed, fraud, etc., out of their hard-earned cash. There is some justification for government to step in. And I think this is where we as a community as well need to continue to improve our bar and self-regulate and cut out those things that might be scams or fraud, but also work with governments in ways and figuring out where can we actually do certain things. I mean, the government has, for example, come out and said Ethereum is not a security, right? And that's a great case. We know there's an ability to create decentralized organizations and a legal framework essentially after that precedence. It's just got to follow this, right?
Right. I agree totally. And I know that, well, as an angel investor, as an investor, you probably don't put any emphasis on any particular project, but maybe you can name some projects, or as Blockchain Founders Fund website says, real world applications that impressed you the most, I would say in the recent year or two.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think there's quite a few, right? And so, yeah, as you mentioned, I mean, we invest across the spectrum, right? So we're industry agnostic and geography agnostic, which means, we're traveling all around the world to find, what we think are some of the best projects and real applications for blockchain. I mean, to name a couple or a few interesting ones, I mean, there's a cybersecurity project out of Silicon Valley called called Cryptic, and Cryptic helps to reduce or essentially help to prevent the cost of hacking. So there's about $1 trillion of hacking every year, and Cryptic is essentially a cloud storage platform, but using cloud storage as a way to do cybersecurity and very, very quick speeds. And so this is actually one of the only backed projects by IBM as an embedded solutions partner. So IBM is actually going to help to sell this solution. And it's about 10,000 times more secure than Google Drive. So very interesting. If you look at the education sector, which is a sector that I'm very passionate about personally, there's a company called Open Source University rolling out a solution to eliminate and combat fake degrees and transcripts. Very, very useful in this day and age. I mean, we've got situations where, for example, the former CEO of Yahoo had a fake degree, right? I mean, there's big figures. I think also the previous dean of admissions at MIT, right? So there's very significant cases where this has happened, and this will help to combat that. If you look at other companies, I mean, we talked a little bit about payments and fintech a little bit. I mean, there's a company called Rapids, which has POS systems that take both credit card and cryptocurrencies and a wide number of cryptocurrencies. And so that's a pretty exciting company that we've seen there. We've seen blockchain being used as well, for example, in another company that's working on it's called Build 1X, or Pay 1X is the product, but they're working on enabling more efficient payments and lending within the construction industry specifically, in the United States. And that's another interesting company that we're seeing like very clear abilities to scale these companies if they can continue to focus on, you know, their one or two areas, and then work on just expanding that, right? Work on making sure that this helps to gain adoption, getting the right partners involved. And we think they're doing a lot of the right pieces around that. We're seeing a lot of interesting things in the agriculture sector. I mean, there's a company in Brazil actually, and a lot of people don't talk about South America that often. There's a company in Brazil called Agrio, and what they do is they help with lending for farmers. But the way that they do it is they have a lot of analytics that they're collecting, and their algorithm actually helps financiers or people that are willing to lend get data, like more accurate data on, you know, what is outputs and yields actually going to be, so that you can actually know whether or not it's worth making this loan. And this takes all sorts of data, including satellite imaging and other things. So very, very interesting company. It's using a lot of different types of technology, including blockchain, to actually help, you know, what could transform the lives of many, many farmers all around the world, especially in developing countries. So some very exciting things happening, especially when you're pairing blockchain with these other technologies that really kind of helps to enable and grow its use case.
We all know that fintech is the largest application of this technology, right? So what's the next for you, for Blockchain Founders Fund, for Polymath? I know that you were advisor to Polymath. What are you working on right now? What's next for you in this space?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, fintech is a great use case, especially I think it is one of the best use cases, especially for cryptocurrency, right? For blockchain, it's much wider, but for cryptocurrency, fintech is a great use case, and we're continuing to focus on looking for really interesting projects that, you know, we might get involved with from an investment perspective. We're looking for early stage companies that might be good candidates for us to help grow as part of our venture builder, where we help them with things like strategy, with, you know, finance, with strategic partnerships, with sales, etc. And we get very involved in those companies that are in our venture builder program. And then on our consulting arm, we're continuing our work with the United Nations, which is one of the main things we're doing right now on that front, and continuing to grow this. Because what we're working on, we're expecting to lead into a lot of different pilots between different countries. And that has the ability to impact tens of millions of people. And so we're very excited and very driven to help roll these out. And if there is companies that want to be and have solutions that are, you know, ready, that could have an impact on some of these different areas that we talked about, especially on a social impact angle, please do reach out, because we are looking for companies that can help transform and solve some of these problems in the developing world. And so that's pretty exciting and motivating for us. And so those are our main focus on that front. On Polymath, I am an advisor, and we are continuing to roll out our solution globally, and our technology has been doing very well. We've done it recently. We've done one of the first transactions on a decentralized exchange as well, which is pretty exciting for us. But I mean, I am an advisor, and so my thoughts are kind of my own. But the idea is, you know, continuing to grow this and really help to decentralize securities across different jurisdictions. And you're starting to see more security token exchanges opening. You're starting to see other sorts of service firms in this space, and I think it's exciting to see that continue to grow. And you're starting to see governments and legislators looking at this more closely and seeing, is there ways to potentially adopt and change this, while, you know, the bigger ship of security tokens continues to leverage existing legislation and build off of that. And you're starting to see some pretty successful raises happen. But this space is still in its early stages, and we're excited to see it keep growing.
Thank you so much, Ali. Thank you. It was very, very interesting. Wish you good luck. It's very interesting work. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Togo.
I'll see you soon.
Absolutely. All right. Take care, and thanks again for having me on the show.
Thank you. Bye.